Hi guys, welcome to Todo, Vida podcast. We are officially on episode 12. Please make sure that you guys are turning on your notifications to be able to be alerted when we are coming out with new episodes. I know that for this one, I took a little bit of a break, not necessarily a break, but with production, I had some things going on, but I'm back better than ever. And I'm excited to just be able to talk about this topic today. If you guys are new here, for those that are barely tuning in, I just want you guys to know that this podcast is all about purpose. And like I've said in other podcasts, it's never about, a sad story or anything like that. But we do talk about things that are not really common, things that I feel like a lot of podcasts don't really talk about. And they're things that we all encounter. But again, we're not going to sit there and talk about. So with this podcast, and especially today's topic, it's going to be self-sabotage and how sometimes it comes naturally. We don't even realize that we're doing it because in our head, it's a defense mechanism. So that's going to be today's topic. And I just want you guys to know, again, like I've said in other episodes, I don't have the answers for everything. I'm navigating through life just the same as anybody else. So if I can go ahead and give my perspective on it or how I'm able to, I have a pretty good way of analyzing certain situations or self-reflecting, which allows me to be more aware of things. And that's something that I feel like has been close to me lately, self-sabotage, because when we've experienced so many poor experiences throughout life with whatever that be, relationships, family, friends, whatever form it comes in, we've experienced poor situations. I feel like for the next one, we tend to try to be more careful. But when you repetitively experience poor situations with people or poor encounters, better said, you tend to start to self-sabotage. And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it until either we've gone too far or we've hurt somebody that we truly care about without, again, even realizing it, because in our head, we were just trying to protect ourselves. So I feel like with self-sabotage, again, it comes naturally. I think that it's our perspective or our way of trying to make sure that the coast is clear before we take the next step, before we allow someone to get close to us and things like that. And I just think that self-sabotage could be something that really ruins things. So in my personal experience, and this is how I'm able to relate to you guys, I feel like because of, every other, what I've talked about in every other episode, not to get repetitive with it, but I feel like I try to be so aware of my next step, who I take my next step with, or the people that I surround myself with when I take that next step, that I tend to overanalyze certain things. And, we would think that there's no such thing as overanalyzing or being too cautious. But sometimes what we tend to do is we tend to try to find a defect, or we tend to try to find like, oh, this is way too good to be true. So let me try to go ahead and find what might be wrong, And, I used to say, like, there's a saying in Spanish, like, el que busca encuentra. And I'd be like, well, yo debo de buscar y no encontrar, It's meaning that the one that looks for it is going to find something, But I used to be like, well, if I'm going to look for it, I want to make sure I don't find nothing. Well, sometimes if you are looking for certain things, right, you can interpret it the way that you want it to. Like, for example, right, like, let's say you're talking to somebody and you're like, I'm going to see if he's following girls, right? And the next thing you know, you come across a girl's page and in your head, you're like, oh my God, he's liking all her pictures. Next thing you know, you find out it's his cousin. Like, and in your head, you're like, well, if I went to go look, I shouldn't find nothing. And I found something. But what I'm trying to say is because we're so overly cautious and because we're trying to find something wrong, we can interpret the most simplest things into something being wrong, And I feel like, how can we overcome self-sabotage? I feel like it takes a lot of reflection. I feel like it takes a lot of just analyzing certain things. And I feel like where we tend to self-sabotage a lot is either in friend groups or in relationships, right? So if you come from poor experiences and you end up encountering somebody good, whether that be a supportive friend, you're probably thinking like, oh, they probably want something from me. Or you tend to think if it's somebody good that's coming your way, you're like, they have a hidden agenda. They have an alternative motive. And maybe you really are just coming across a good person. How can you tell, right? So I think that with time, eventually the person just ends up showing you. And I think that if you pay attention to your intuition, you're able to tell where let's say you start to overthink, or you start to think that it's too good to be true or whatever. If you listen to your intuition enough and you're intact with that, right? And you're spiritual, I feel like eventually with time, things will be able to play out exactly how they should be, right? So what I mean by that is in different encounters, whether that's friendship or relationships, right? Sometimes you're coming to get to know a person and you think that maybe they have an alternative motive, right? And eventually you start to see that when you are self-sabotaging in any relationship, friendship, whatever, you get to a point, if you're conscious enough, if you're aware enough, you'll realize that to an extent you become the problem, because maybe you're hyper fixating on things that before you really wouldn't. It wouldn't be that big of a deal, but because you are scared, ultimately, I think that that's also what drives you to self-sabotage is fear of getting hurt, fear of desiring something and it may not being exactly what you expected it to be. So when we tend to self-sabotage, we have to get to a point of realizing like you might be the problem, you know? And I think that it takes a person that is rooted with themselves to be able to take accountability for those things, right? Like for me personally, the way that I was experiencing it is like now trying to get back into like getting to know somebody, you know, getting into dating and stuff like that. And like, I feel like because of the poor experiences that I've experienced, I feel like I would kind of self-sabotage and be like, well, I don't want to be the idiot that ends up falling for it again or whatever, right? So what you tend to do is you kind of sometimes will either, and I don't want to, it's not delusion, right? But you start to try to not make up scenarios in your head, but you tend to look at certain things with negativity, you know? And I know that because people hear me on the podcast, they might think that I have it all figured out, but no, I think that when you start to self-sabotage, you start to realize that you still have triggers and you have to be able to talk to yourself. And like, again, back to trying to get back into dating, right? And stuff like that. It's like, I would see myself encountering a good person time and time again, but because it was not exactly to the T what I wanted, I figured like, nah, well, it's cool. I'm better off alone. And then I would go and I would not necessarily try to find better, but I would explore, I guess you could say, other options, right? And then you come across people that are like really, really shitty. And you're like, oh my gosh, like this one person, nobody's perfect, right? So I would think like if they didn't have 10 out of 10 things perfect with them, then ahí no es para mí. Like I'm not meant to be there, right? And then you go off and you drift off into like the real world, right? Where not everything is exactly how you want it. And you realize that there's some people that don't even got 3 out of the 10 things that you desire. And you're like, oh, wow, maybe I was just hyperfixating on the fact that I wanted this person to be perfect, because if not, I felt like they weren't deserving of me. That then I realized like, okay, well, why did I want this person to be so perfect? Oh, because the last person defaulted in this, and that. So then you expect the next situation to be able to fulfill all the things that you didn't get from your previous experience. Now, again, that could be with friendships, that could be with relationships. I feel like with family, we tend to like know better. So I mean, maybe there is such thing as self-sabotaging with family members. But again, if you pay attention to your intuition enough, you're able to realize where like eventually things play itself out and people either show you, you know, they either prove you wrong or they show exactly where you might have had a point, you know? And when that does come about, you have to be able to sit with yourself and be like, oh, I think I was tripping a little too much, you know? You have to be aware. You have to be able to pay attention to things, because when you start to nitpick at every single thing, you know, granted, if you're not ready to embark in that journey, whether it be like, you know, a business venture, you're trying to self-sabotage because it sounds too good to be true, or a friendship or a relationship, if you just genuinely feel like you're not ready, then okay, that's fine. I commend you for accepting the fact that you're not ready versus just trying to nitpick at every single thing, you know? And I got to a point of self-sabotage myself where I ended up having such a strong perspective on a situation in my life where I thought I knew everything. So I departed from this person for a while. And then I realized like, oh, wow, like nobody's perfect, not even me. And I have to be a little bit more gracious or graceful with them, merciful. I don't know the exact word, but I ended up realizing like, okay, like, let me see how much good outweighs the bad. Because if you're looking for perfect out there, respectfully, like, you're not going to find it. Like, perfect doesn't exist. And I know sometimes we think like, well, I have a lot to offer, whether that's in a friendship or whatever. We think like, well, I have a lot to offer. Okay, you're going to tell me that you never default. You're going to tell me that you just know everything, huh? Like, that's not realistic. Like, I think that in life, in any situation, as we, continue with our journeys, there comes a point where you have to self-reflect and be like, hey, I'm still evolving in X, Y, and Z, So self-sabotage, sometimes it's rooted from, I don't know if love's the word, but like it's rooted from a place of just fear, a fear of being hurt, fear of not wanting things to go left again, fear of not wanting to look a certain way to people. But, if you can trust your instincts and if you can trust your intuition, eventually either this person is either going to call you out or they're going to have enough love for you to be patient. But you have to be able to express yourself like, hey, I reacted like this because, and it's not fair for past situations to be the cause as to why you react that way, but it's the reason behind your trigger. And if you can go ahead and talk about it like, hey, I reacted like this because of a situation I encountered prior. And while it's not fair for the next person to have to deal with it, it's not so much about them dealing with it. It's about you being able to express yourself and say why that trigger was, apologize, and then correct yourself. Because I get it. It's not fair for, let's say, the next person that's trying to get close to you, whether that again be in dating or friendships, whether it's not fair for them to have to weep what the last person sowed. It's also something that can be the cause of your trigger. And you have to be able to analyze with yourself, because how are you going to be able to explain to that person that probably has really good intentions with you? How are you able to explain to them what the trigger was, why you reacted the way that you reacted? You're not going to be able to if you don't even know yourself, if you're not willing to be vulnerable and aware with yourself. Because sometimes we get so stuck in thinking that we know everything that you don't even want to be vulnerable with yourself sometimes and being like, you know what? I kind of overreacted on this. Okay, well, why'd you overreact? Like, I literally have conversations with myself sometimes and be like, okay, why did you react that way? Where was that rooted from? And I feel like a lot of people lack that because they lack accountability, because they lack a sense of being in tune with themselves. They don't even want to say where they went wrong to themselves. Like, nobody else is listening but you. Have that moment of self-reflection and be like, okay, what did I do wrong? How could I have handled that better? And, that I think that's one of the most humbling experiences is you having to correct yourself. Because if you cannot correct yourself, who is? You're going to be walking around like your shit don't stink. And respectfully, that's just not the way to be. I understand being cautious and I understand wanting to make the correct move. But when something is not meant for you, you're going to be able to distinguish that. And how? Because time will show you. Their true colors are going to come out, and then you also know, like, pick your battles wisely too. Like, if it's someone that maybe just defaulted in something unknowingly, and you can tell by the way that they react, if their reaction is pure, if you bring it to their attention and they're like, oh, I'm really sorry I made you feel that way. That wasn't my intention at all. Then you can distinguish like whether they just genuinely made a mistake, because we're all human and we all do, or you're going to be able to see like they didn't even want to hear what I had to say. And when someone tends to listen just to, talk back versus listening to genuinely respond from a vulnerable place, then you know that they didn't have good intentions to begin with. And with time, people, whatever you guys believe in, I have my faith. So I say like, eventually, like, God will weed those people out for you, you know? But some people want to say, well, the universe will take them out. Like I've always said, just believe in something, you know? You will see that eventually people that are not meant to be in your life, whether that's, again, relationships, friendships, business ventures, where you're just so, like traumatized from past experiences that you're not able to accept the good that's about to come forward to you. You'll be able to weed out the people that are genuinely not for you, and the people that are, even if you tend to self-sabotage, I genuinely feel like if they really love you, they'll either do two things. Like I said, they'll either have the patience for you or they'll call you out on it. And the way that they call you out, even that says a lot, because they're not calling you out to point fingers. They're trying to bring it to your attention. And, you know, luckily with me, I was able to be given patience. And with patience, I was able to see and self-reflect where certain things I was just straight up tripping, you know? And something that I had said earlier when I was having a conversation with one of my family members, I was saying that sometimes when we are in situations, right, and we're self-sabotaging, we have to be able to express ourselves to that person so that way they know where it's coming from. Because a person is not going to be able to read your mind, right? You're going to have to express yourself and say, okay, this is why I reacted that way. But when you tend to have that conversation, you have to be able to check yourself. And so in that situation where I was given patience, right? I always ask God for the things that I don't have, or the things that I wasn't given, right? So like, for example, growing up, I wasn't given patience, right? God is not gonna, and I've hope you guys have heard this before. God is not gonna give you patience. He's gonna put you in situations for you to develop patience. You know, if you want clarity, he's not gonna give you clarity. He's gonna bring you confusion so that you can gain clarity, so that you can learn clarity. So I feel like with certain situations, right, we'll be like, we want someone who's patient, we want someone who's X, Y, and Z. And sometimes it's not just going to be given to you. You're going to be put in situations where you have to gain patience. And I feel like because that's one of the things I didn't have, that's one of the things I lack is patience. That's a huge thing I lack. Then when I'm in a situation where I'm having to develop patience, I start to self-sabotage, and I start to be like, well, if they were really meant to be in my life, then they would have X, Y, and Z lined up. And it's like, okay, but hold on. Does the good outweigh the bad? Okay, yes, it does. All right, then what you're asking for, you're now having to develop, which is patience. So I do a pretty good job of being able to bring that awareness to myself. And the reason why I share it with you guys right now is because I hope you guys can do that for yourself as well. I think that self-sabotage, like I said earlier in the episode, I think it can kill a lot of things. And you have to be able to trust your intuition. That's going to be key for you to know when it's self-sabotage and when something is genuinely not for you. Because I feel like that's where the confusion comes. It's like, okay, how do I know if I'm the one self-sabotaging? And how do I know when a situation really isn't for me? Whether that's, again, a business venture, a relationship, or a friendship, you know? And you just tend to be a little bit more aware without trying to pinpoint every single negative thing, because that's self-sabotage. When you're trying to pinpoint every single defect or everything that is not exactly to your liking, you have to kind of humble yourself a little bit and be like, okay, out of the 10 things that I want out of this situation, or the 5, right? I'm getting like 8 out of 10. But if you fixate on the 2 things that you're not receiving from, you know, whatever situation you're in, whatever relationship, friendship you're in, then it's like, so you want 10 out of 10? Because I can guarantee, and not to humble anybody out there, but I can guarantee, even with myself, like, no one's going to look at you and be like, oh yeah, they're 10 out of the 10 things that I want, because we all have defects. Now, if it's a situation where it's like, it ain't even 4 out of 10, then yeah, definitely that is not a situation you want to be in. But, you know, self-sabotage is just, it's, dude, it's really hard, because you have to be vulnerable enough with yourself to see where maybe you're at fault. where maybe you're just, I don't know, being way too hard on people. Like, I remember I had a conversation with one of my clients and it literally stuck with me. I was talking to her about what I wanted out of a relationship, right? Like, I was like, well, I want them to be like this, and I want them to have money. And let me tell you guys something. I've always been a lover girl. Like, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I've never been able to be a material girl. I've never been able to be someone that just strictly goes out for what somebody has in their bank account, because at the end of the day, I'm more about morals, character, respect. I'm more about that than I am about what somebody has in their bank account, right? I treat everybody with the same respect. And I remember I was having a conversation with her, and I was just going on and on about the things that I wanted and about what I deserved, and right? And she told me, she goes, why do you want this person, again, because of prior, experiences, why do you want this person to be able to like give you what you give yourself, which is like $800 self-care days, and pay for your car, and pay for your nails, and pay for this, and pay for that? She was like, why do you want somebody to give you what you can already give yourself? And that's the biggest gift of all, that you can give it to yourself, Ash. And I was just kind of like, it kind of like shut me up a little bit, right? And I kind of started to tone down my demeanor of like what I want, right? So she brings me with that, and she goes, and like, why else do you feel that way? I mean, you can already give it to yourself, but why else? And I'm like, well, look how I was in my previous, whatever, like, relationship. I gave them everything. And she's like, yeah, well, sorry to tell you this. And it came from I knew it came from a really good place because of the past conversations we've had. But she goes, if you were so perfect, why are you single? And I was like, oh. And I did not take offense to it, because I was like, you know what? You're right. And I started to hold myself accountable. You know what? I lacked in self-respect. I gave that person too much. I didn't have boundaries. I did, and I was like, oh my gosh. So that conversation really humbled me. And I think that it's okay to be humbled sometimes, because we get so focused on the things that we want that if you don't surround yourself with at least some people that are willing to hold you accountable, I think you're in the wrong room, And that day she really like held me accountable. And then she goes, and also too, like, let me go ahead and bring something to your attention. She goes, so, because of your past experience, you want a man with like hella money, whatever. And I was like, well, it's not that. I just want someone who's like gonna be like totally stable, ready to buy a house, ready to this, ready, like, and she's in a really good relationship herself where her partner is completely stable, whatever. And I said, well, I see you and I see it as like motivation, and I want something like that, right? Like, and she goes, yeah, me and my partner are also 10 years older than you, meaning we've had more time to develop, meaning we've had more time to achieve the things that we want, because you're still building in your 20s. And I was like, fuck. Like, I get it. I'm all about working hard. I'm all about like getting everything that I want in this lifetime. But what did I say earlier in the episode? I lack patience. I lack patience for my goals. I lack patience for the things that I want. And, yes, it's worked to my advantage where I've been able to get the things that I want. But that's why I also have talked about it in previous episodes. I get burnt out sometimes because I don't have patience. So I continue to just chase all the things that I want, not giving myself that time for things to develop. So then what was I doing? I was expecting the person that's going to come into my life to be able to pull the same, or if not more. And I'm like, that's not fair. And then just, wrap up what that conversation was about. And she goes, and another thing, do you think that a man that only has money, and I'm not saying, for anybody listening out there, I'm not saying settle. I'm not saying don't get everything you want. But that was mainly where my demeanor was coming from. Like, I want someone that's like, can provide all this. And I was just so focused on like, if they cannot do for me financially what I could do for myself, then I don't want them in my life. And she goes, do you think that a man with money that can give you like $1,000 to blow in a day, right? You think that person's going to care about you? You think that person's going to respect you? Do you think that person is going to have morals and values? Chances are they're not, because they have the money to not have to deal with you. And I was like, oh, like that conversation humbled me so much. And what was I doing? I was talking about I want, and I deserve, and I this, that I never once looked in the mirror and said, but at one point, Ashley, you didn't have it all. At one point, you're still growing and you're still developing, right? So that is my personal correlation to this topic of self-sabotage. And luckily, I had someone that was from a place of love, right? Because I've said it in other episodes, if you don't have people that are willing to hold you accountable, then, you're in the wrong room. But I thought, even at that moment, I thought that I did a really good job of self-reflecting. I thought I did a really good job of holding myself accountable. But I think that I was so stuck in the things that I wanted and what I deserved that I was kind of self-sabotaging and blinding myself to the other 8 out of 10 things that are good about a person. And, whether it's, again, I said, usually with relationships, it comes from either 3 aspects or three different like scenarios or, whatever. It's either from family, from relationships, or from friends. And I feel like it's really hard to self-sabotage with family because family, they're going to show themselves time and time again. They're going to show their true colors time and time again. But with friendships or with relationships, we tend to self-sabotage more often than not. We do. And I completely understand, you guys, where it comes from a place of wanting to be cautious, and it comes from a place of just wanting to make the right step. But if you're in tune with your intuition, and if you're in tune with your faith and paying attention to the signs, and you're willing to be vulnerable and you're willing to self-reflect, then I think that eventually it'll come to light whether a situation is for you or whether you're the problem or whether you're the one that's, como they say, doing the most. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to that, and let's say either someone brings it to your attention or you're able to, evaluate yourself and say where you're at fault, I hope that you guys have the vulnerability to be able to take that in and, hold yourself accountable, and also to be able to put it into effect, because you can't say, what is rooting this trigger, and you can't say where you're at fault, and you can't own up to these things without change. If that's the case, you're going to continue to go in a circle, and it's going to continue to happen, whether it's with this person, the next person, or the next person after that. You're going to continue to do it because you're not stopping that cycle of self-sabotage. So I just want you guys to know, I definitely do understand you when it comes to wanting to be cautious, especially people that have a lot to lose. If you have a lot to lose, you tend to self-sabotage a lot because you want to make sure that the next move is the exact correct move. And I can completely understand that. But even those of us that have achieved a lot and have, done a lot for ourselves, it's like, even us, we're not perfect. We're really not. And a lot of times that hustle that we have, that drive that we have to be something in life and do something with our life, it's never came from a silver spoon. It's always came from some sort of something that we lacked, whether it's like stability, whether it's whatever it can be. We tend to hustle our way into being that and embodying that because it's something that we didn't have. And then once we achieve that, it's easy for us to feel like, well, I did what I never had. I achieved what I never had. So, now I'm on top of the world. And even when we get to that point, like I said, if you're in a room where nobody's going to be willing to hold you accountable, or nobody's going to be able to give you a different perspective on even your side of things, you're not really in the correct room, because there's no diversity. There's no challenge. There's no self-reflection. There's none of that. So, if you're ever wondering what the difference between self-sabotage and a situation that's not genuinely for you, you got to really, really start with like self-reflection. You got to really line things up and say, does the good outweigh the bad? And also too, when a situation is not meant for you, true colors are going to show. And you have to be able to say, how many times have their true colors shown while I've been willing to turn a blind eye? Because that's, again, if we refer back to another episode, I talked about forgiveness, but along with forgiveness is holding yourself accountable. Why did you allow those things to happen as many times as they did? And that's where we start to kind of blind things, because we think, well, maybe the situation isn't for us. I guarantee you, if a situation is not for you, it will show time and time and time again. But if every single time it's you finding things to not like, if you're just not ready, just say that. And if you're genuinely wanting to see more of the good than the bad, then change your perspective, because chances are you're outweighing, you're allowing the 2 out of 10 to outweigh the good 8 out of 10, because you just don't want to see it, because you're either too scarred, you're too traumatized from previous experiences, and it's okay to have those triggers. It's okay to have them, because I've always said, when you have those triggers, it allows you to become more aware that you still have them, right? That you lack that development still in that sector of your life. So triggers are okay to have, but you have to be able to voice and acknowledge the trigger, voice how that trigger made you react, and be able to say sorry for it. Because sometimes we are so stuck in like, well, I already reacted, so I already went off the deep end. I kind of got to stay there now. Like, I got to stand on business. And it's like, that's just ultimately you not being vulnerable. And if you do decide to end up being vulnerable, and the person that's receiving that, you saying where you're at fault, is kind of just more like, yeah, I told you so, or like, kind of throwing it in your face a little bit more than just receiving it and understanding you, then that's when you know the difference. That's when you know when someone is not meant for you, or or when someone is meant to be in your life. And that could sometimes be friends too. Like, even with me starting up on social media, starting up my business, I seen in the beginning where, unfortunately, a lot of people wanted to take more than anything from me. And I didn't. And a lot of people listening will probably be like, well, who wanted to take from you? And, it was just encounters that I would have. And in the long run, like I said, God will weed these people out. But because of that, I'm very cautious now of who I have in my circle. Or I start to think to myself like, well, they wouldn't do the same for me. And maybe there's that one day where I end up needing someone to talk to, and they are there. And I'm like, oh, like I really thought like I didn't even need anybody in my corner. And then eventually God will show you like you do need a tribe, you do need your people. And when those people are there to show up, they just do show up. And that's when you know, like, even when the aspect of friendships, when people are meant to be in your corner. So I just don't want you guys to have past experiences prevent you from a better future, because I get it. Things happen. Things can tend to hold weight on your heart. But literally, like, as cliche as it sounds, like, life goes on, and you're going to continue to have experiences with people, and you're going to continue to encounter people, some good, some bad. But when you encounter good people, you really got to hold on to them, because with the generation that we live in, there's not many of them. And people have genuine faults sometimes. Like, sometimes they don't even realize, or sometimes too, we put them on this like standard of how we want things. And when they don't, achieve the complete standard, we're like, cut. But it's like, you're not perfect either, So it's like, as I have this podcast and, my platform starts to grow, I know that I may seem as though I have everything well put together, but that was something that was weighing on me a lot recently, was like self-sabotage, or, just not believing when I'm deserving of good things sometimes. And not always is life going to be bad. Not always is life going to have just downhill. Sometimes it's going to have uphills. And like, when you have those moments of things going good, because life is a roller coaster, it's a wave, right? Of like up and downs, take it in, soak it in, and believe that you deserve it. Because if we're encountering something good happening in our life, I mean, you got to believe you deserve it. Because if you don't believe you deserve it, then why is it happening to you? And if you don't believe you deserve it, then you're not going to be willing to absorb that moment and soak it up and just ultimately feel deserving of it. Because then it just takes away the value of it. Then you're not going to be able to live in that moment and really experience it. So I think that just the same way we have bad, we have good. And if something good's coming your way, don't self-sabotage it. Don't self-sabotage it to the point of no return. And if you feel like you have self-sabotaged it, be vulnerable with yourself and with the person on the other end of that self-sabotage and see how they react. If they react well, then you know that they're meant to be in your life. If they don't react well, then they didn't really appreciate the moment of you being vulnerable, and have grace. I feel like with this podcast, I've been able to encourage everybody to have a high standard and encourage everybody to not let certain things in their life occur, but I also want to be the first to be able to say too, like, it's okay to be merciful. It's okay to be graceful with the people that deserve it. And if you're wondering whether or not that they deserve it, look at the way that they move. Look at the way that they probably are there for you when you have nothing to offer them, because believe it or not, there are days that I get burnt out too. There are days where I don't, it's hard for me to be on 10 every single time, So when that tends to happen, God brings people in my corner that become my tribe to realize, like, okay, these are the people that I have to lean on. And for all the, maybe out of the 10, for all the 8, 9 people that were bad, I don't ever want to be too hard on the one person that's good. Because I've never wanted to not have mercy with the person that actually deserves it. Because I've been that person where, like, I navigate through life and maybe I'm the one good person that this person encounters, and they end up just being way too cutthroat with me. And I'm like, whoa, like, I didn't deserve that. So I never want to be on the other end of that. I never want to not have grace or not be merciful to the person that deserves it. And I get it. A lot of times we encounter poor situations that don't allow us to trust like that. But it's like, if you just are on defense, like if your defense is on 10 every single time, every single day for the rest of your life, you are not ultimately going to be able to absorb and enjoy the good moments in life, because then you're trying to look for every single thing that's wrong with it. And I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. Nothing's perfect. There are going to be some situations that you're going to be in that maybe it's not meant for you. But if you're questioning it, it's probably because you've already seen that it's not meant for you. And it's not just going to show like once. It's going to show time and time again. So again, that's accountability, self-reflect, and just ultimately try to be aware of your surroundings. Try to be aware of yourself, of your triggers, self-reflect on where that trigger is coming from, where it's rooted. Like, as we continue to go on and throughout life, like, we're going to encounter so many different scenarios. We're going to encounter so many different situations that we have to be able to navigate through them. And the only way that you can navigate through life is by evolving. There's so many different chapters in life you have to evolve in. And again, if you're just self-sabotaging the entire way because, you want to use the excuse of being overly cautious and trying to be super careful of everything, like, granted, that's good, but to an extent, like, not too much, because I've done that before and I was just on 10, and it took me having a conversation with someone that I know cares about me to humble me, because prior to that, I didn't have anybody that would like humble me, like, I love when I love being held accountable, because while I've evolved, a lot of people have seen my success, and that's great and everything. But if they love you enough, they will hold you accountable. And I needed that to be able to ground myself again, because one thing I've always said is, like, forever humble. And it takes somebody humbling you sometimes to kind of, reground yourself a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're defiant towards it, then that's when you kind of start to know, like, you're the problem. It's like when you start to be more defiant, more resistant of taking any accountability, then that's when like, you've been self-sabotaging the whole time. I get it. There's a difference between gaslighting and, but at this point, it's like, you should be able to know the difference. How do you know the difference? Self-reflecting, being able to analyze situations and seeing where the good outweighs the bad. So I just wanted to come on here today and share this with you guys. I know that I hadn't recorded a few episodes in a few weeks, because just as much as I am present with my podcast, I am also present in my day-to-day life. I do have a life outside of this platform. I do have a life outside of my business. And while I've put that on hold for a really long time, me being able to cater to my personal life and my personal experiences allows me to be able to convey a message on this podcast. And that was something that I was experiencing, was self-sabotaging, And with that being said, that's why I'm really, really glad that without knowing, that break was kind of needed. And it didn't even intend to be a break. Like literally, like it just was not aligning up with, my production dates. It just wasn't aligning, So I think everything happens for a reason. I think that the timing is perfect. And I hope that those that are listening right now can really relate to this, because it's things that we all go through and we don't know how to navigate through. And it's okay to not know, which is exactly what I've said on this episode. Like I've been very vulnerable with expressing how there was times I didn't even know that I was self-sabotaging, but I try to give the tools that worked for me. And luckily, I got a little bit of everything. I had someone that gave me patience. I had someone that humbled me. I had the moment of self-reflecting and being vulnerable with myself and taking accountability, because I'm big on accountability. Like, come on, and even anybody that tries to play stupid, like you are not stupid. Like, well enough. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be able to use these tools, and the tools that I used, I feel like are pretty universal. I feel like you guys can try to implement them as well. And if you don't know how to navigate, if you are really stuck in a corner of like, I do not know how to navigate through this situation, I don't know whether or not this person is meant to be in my life, or this situation is going to be good for me, or if this business venture is meant to be in my plans, I told you guys on previous episodes, if you want to know if something is meant for you, pray about it. Pray about it. And I promise you the answer it'll show itself. And when it does, you have to be willing to listen. So again, I just hope that I was able to get my message across with you guys. I always correlate back to, scenarios that I've lived, situations that I've been in, and how I've been able to learn. And then I go ahead and I express to you guys how I came about that, again, the self-reflecting and all that stuff. So I hope that this episode did good use to somebody out there. I want you guys to know that you guys are never alone in these scenarios, in these situations. You are not the only one. And I applaud you for being vulnerable enough to being willing to listen to this episode and hold that accountability. Because I know somewhere along the lines, when you guys are listening to this episode, wherever you guys are, you're like, I can relate to that. Oh my gosh, I would do that too. I can relate to that because I did this. And then it gets your wheels spinning, where you're like, okay, I did that as well. And she's talking about a trigger, and that was my trigger, and it came rooted from this. And that's ultimately what I just hope to do with these episodes. I hope to be able to talk about things that are uncommon for us to talk about on social media, because like I've said before, social media tends to be an illusion. And then I came on this podcast to just be vulnerable, raw, and real. And luckily that's been the success that has fueled this podcast to be where it's at today. And I only plan to continue to grow. But along with that, I have to be able to take course of my own life. So with this, slight break that I took, like, again, was unintentional. I shouldn't even call it a break, but this little gap that I took in between recording, it was really, really needed. And I've always said, I pray about it, and whatever comes to me is what needs to be talked about. So today's topic was self-sabotage. I hope that I was able to give you guys the tools on just how to maneuver better, how to hold yourself accountable, and things like that. And again, if you're new here and this is the first episode, well, I'm glad you guys got a really good episode. I promise the other ones are just as good. But thank you guys again for tuning into Todo, Vida podcast. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all the love, support, kind messages that I get. And, make sure you guys turn on your notifications so that you guys know when I come out with the next episode. And once again, thank you guys so much. I will see you guys on the next episode of Todo, Vida podcast. You guys have a great night, day, wherever you're at. And again, I'll see you on the next episode. Peace out.